There's a moment, often in the quiet hours when the world has stopped demanding so much of you, when you start to wonder why giving your all never seems to be enough. Maybe you've felt this, that ache in your chest when you realize you've loved with an open heart, only to watch someone treat your devotion like a passing convenience. It's a kind of silent sorrow, isn't it? The pain of believing that the more you pour yourself into someone, the more they will finally see you, finally choose you, finally love you the way you have always deserved. And yet, the more you give, the less they seem to value what you offer. It can feel like standing in front of a mirror that refuses to reflect anything back. Somewhere along the way, you may have learned to mistake overgiving for strength, as if carrying the relationship alone could prove your worthiness. You were taught, perhaps without words, that being chosen meant becoming indispensable, sacrificing parts of yourself to be what someone else needed. But this hunger to be validated, to be seen as irreplaceable, doesn't arise from love. It grows from old stories lodged deep inside your heart, stories about not being enough, not being wanted, not being worthy. Louise Hay often reminded us that we attract what we believe we deserve, and when a woman carries the silent belief that she is unworthy of true devotion, she becomes, in her own words, a garden that anyone can trample. It's tender to admit that much of this need to overgive is rooted in fear, a fear of loneliness so sharp it cuts through your sense of self. Marianne Williamson once wrote that our fear of being alone blinds us to our spiritual value. When you are terrified of your own emptiness, you will fill it with anyone's presence, even if that presence feels like absence in disguise. You might find yourself shrinking, softening your voice, abandoning your own needs, just to hold on to the illusion of connection, because anything feels better than the echo of your own solitude. Anything feels safer than facing the question that haunts you late at night. Am I worthy of love without having to earn it? You may not realize how your beliefs weave themselves into every interaction. The belief that you are incomplete alone, the belief that you must give more, prove more, suffer more to deserve affection, and all the while, something sacred in you grows tired of the performance. Some quiet voice whispers that this isn't love, not the love that heals or elevates or makes you more of who you truly are. But even that voice can be hard to trust when you've been taught to measure your value by how much you can endure. What if the truth is simpler, though harder to accept? What if the men who can't cherish you are simply drawn to the parts of you that have not yet learned how to say no? What if their interest feeds on your willingness to remain small, to stay in places where your heart is never fully met? These are not easy questions to sit with. They ask you to look at the patterns that have shaped your life. They ask you to feel the sadness of all the times you stayed too long, hoping that love would eventually reward your patience. But here's something to consider gently. You were never meant to be a garden for everyone to walk through. You were meant to be a sanctuary, a place of reverence, a space where only those who honor your spirit are allowed to enter. And maybe, just maybe, the moment you decide to believe you are worthy of true devotion is the moment everything begins to change. And so, as we go deeper, I want you to hold this image close to your heart. A garden with a gate, not to keep love out, but to protect what is sacred inside you. Because the story you carry about your worth will always shape who is drawn to you and who drifts away. And this story, dear one, is yours to rewrite whenever you are ready. Sometimes, the most relentless hunger is not for love itself, but for approval dressed up as love. You may recognize it in the way your heart quickens when he finally texts back after days of silence, or how a simple compliment feels like oxygen after you've been holding your breath, waiting to matter again. This invisible hunger can become the axis around which your entire life begins to spin, without you even noticing that you are orbiting a man who has never learned how to meet you in your fullness. It's a slow erosion of self, almost imperceptible, until one day you wake up and realize you've built your sense of worth entirely on whether someone else finds you worthy of staying. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly scanning for signs that you are enough. You find yourself replaying every conversation, every moment, wondering if you were too much or not enough. You start to believe that if you just give a little more understanding, more patience, more of your time, he will finally see the light that has always been in you. But what if that hope is nothing more than a temporary relief from a deeper wound? What if his validation is only an anesthetic, numbing the ache of your own self-rejection? Louise Hay once said, "You have been criticizing yourself for years and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens." Those words hold a truth that feels almost unbearable. You can spend a lifetime chasing someone else's approval and never fill the emptiness that grows when you withhold it from yourself. It can be disorienting to realize how much you've abandoned your own center in the name of love. You may think you're being devoted, committed, generous, and yes, you are all of those things. But when your generosity becomes a strategy to earn affection, it stops being an expression of love and becomes a plea to be chosen. There is no shame in this. Many women have learned to equate self-sacrifice with value. Many of us were raised to believe that our worth was measured by how much we could endure and how little we needed in return. And so, the cycle continues. You give, and when he pulls away, you give a little more, hoping that this time it will be enough. But the more you try to convince someone of your value, the further you drift from the part of you that already knows you are worthy. It's like pouring water into a cup with no bottom. No matter how much you offer, it will never be contained, never be reciprocated in the way your heart is longing for. But what happens when the need for approval becomes the very thing that keeps you in relationships that starve you? What happens when you realize that the hunger you feel is not because you are unlovable, but because you have not yet learned how to love yourself without conditions? These are tender questions, and they deserve your gentlest attention. Because the truth is, when you begin to approve of yourself, something shifts in the fabric of your life. You stop chasing scraps. You stop mistaking crumbs for feasts. You begin to remember that real love never requires you to prove your worth. And perhaps the most radical act of love you can offer yourself is to stop waiting for someone else to name your value, to look at your reflection, with all its softness and all its scars, and whisper, "I am already enough." There is a certain paradox that quietly shapes the way some men approach love, a paradox that can feel both infuriating and deeply confusing when you are the one offering your heart without reservation. It's the uncomfortable reality that many men feel most alive in the pursuit, not in the having. They crave the locked door because it challenges their ego to find the key, not because they are ready to honor what waits behind it. And so, when you stand before them, open, available, willing to give everything, something in them recoils, not because you are too much, but because they are unprepared for a love that does not require conquest to feel valuable. This is not an indictment of your tenderness or your sincerity. It is simply an observation of how wounded masculinity often responds to intimacy. When a man has not learned how to meet himself, he will look for a woman whose openness feels like a prize he has to win. But once the game is over, once your heart is fully revealed, he no longer feels the same pull. It's a cruel dance, one that has nothing to do with your worth, and everything to do with his inability to receive love without struggle. You may have noticed this in subtle ways, how his attention grows when you set a boundary, how he leans in when you grow quiet, how his desire intensifies when you stop offering all of yourself so freely. And it can feel so unfair, can it? That withholding becomes magnetic while your generosity seems to repel. But perhaps there is a deeper truth beneath this dynamic, a truth that has nothing to do with playing games, and everything to do with remembering your own value. When you value yourself, when you hold your energy with quiet confidence, you stop being a reward waiting to be claimed. You become a whole person who does not measure her worth by whether someone chooses to stay. And ironically, that dignity, your unwillingness to abandon yourself, becomes the very thing that awakens respect in the hearts of those capable of giving it. It's not about pretending to be disinterested or crafting an illusion of distance. It's about recognizing that true connection can only thrive where mutual respect lives. When you stop overextending, when you trust that your presence is already enough, you create a space where only those who can meet you in wholeness will remain. And maybe that's the lesson hidden beneath the paradox of disinterest. Not that you must play hard to get, but that you must be willing to stay loyal to yourself even when your loneliness aches. Because the love that grows from your own rootedness is the love that will never need to be chased or earned. When you begin to see this pattern with clarity, something inside you exhales. You realize you were never too much. You were simply offering your heart to someone who could only value what he had to struggle to obtain, and that is not your burden to carry anymore. If you pause and truly listen beneath your words, you might hear the quiet language your energy speaks every time you enter a room, every time you reach for someone whose heart is half closed. It is the language of silent longing, of unspoken hope, of the subtle desperation that says, "Please, see me." please, stay. Even when your voice is calm, your body carries an ancient prayer for belonging, a plea that lingers in your eyes, in the way you lean in just a little too far, in the way your heart tightens when he turns away. This is the part of you that learned to equate persistence with love. The part that believes if you just wait long enough, prove yourself worthy enough, he will finally realize you are everything he ever wanted. And so you stay, holding your breath, monitoring every shift in his mood, hoping that your devotion will be enough to heal the gap between you. But what if this persistence is not devotion at all? What if it is simply a way to avoid feeling the raw truth that you have abandoned yourself in your quest to be chosen? It takes an almost unbearable honesty to see how often we confuse anxiety with affection. That flutter in your chest when he finally calls is not love. It is the relief of momentarily escaping your own fear of not being enough. And the more you look to him to calm that fear, the more power you give away. You become a woman who waits, who compromises, who loses sleep replaying every word she spoke, wondering if she was too open, too needy, too much. But perhaps there is another way to hold yourself in these moments. A way to step back from the edge of reactivity and find a kind of sacred silence inside your own being. A silence that doesn't require performance or explanation. A silence that feels like a steady hand on your heart, reminding you that you are allowed to want more than breadcrumbs. Imagine what it would feel like to trust that you do not have to prove your worth. To allow your energy to settle. To resist the urge to rush in and fix. To fill the space with words or reassurances. There is a dignity in that stillness. A power that is both quiet and unshakable. Because when you choose to cultivate emotional silence instead of anxious pursuit, you reclaim the parts of yourself that were never meant to be handed over in exchange for someone else's attention. And maybe the most tender truth is this: when you stop pleading with your presence, when you learn to sit with the discomfort of not knowing whether he will stay, you give yourself the greatest gift, a chance to finally feel at home in your own heart. There comes a moment, sometimes in the quiet aftermath of yet another disappointment, when you realize just how much of yourself you have abandoned to fit into the small spaces someone offered you. It's a slow unraveling to see all the times you said yes when your heart whispered no. All the times you made yourself smaller so he wouldn't feel threatened. All the times you accepted crumbs because you were afraid of the emptiness that might follow if you asked for more. When you live this way for long enough, it starts to feel normal. You convince yourself that love is supposed to feel like trying harder, waiting longer, sacrificing more. You tell yourself that if you can just be patient, if you can just be easy to love, he will wake up one day and realize you were worth choosing all along. But in the process, you start to forget who you were before you learn to measure your value by how much space you could shrink into. Some women don't see the cost of this self-abandonment until the moment they finally close the door. And often, it is only then, only in the act of walking away, that their absence becomes visible to the one who took their presence for granted. It feels almost cruel that you had to disappear to be noticed. But this is one of the most painful truths of unbalanced love. Some people only appreciate your light when it no longer warms them. There is a story I have carried in my heart about a woman who spent years believing that if she just held on tightly enough, he would eventually love her back. She gave everything, her time, her dreams, her tenderness, and still, he remained distant, always keeping one foot out the door. The day she finally chose herself over the hope of being chosen, she felt a grief so profound it nearly broke her. But in the months that followed, something unexpected happened. She began to remember who she was before she thought she needed him to feel whole. And when he finally came back, ready to offer what she had always wanted, she realized she no longer needed it to feel complete. Sometimes, it takes walking away to discover the part of you that never truly left, the part that was waiting, patiently, for you to return to yourself. And maybe this is the question you have been avoiding, the one that quietly echoes every time you wonder if you are enough. What would you do if you believed you were already worthy of the love you keep trying to earn? What would you choose if you trusted that you were already enough? There is something almost revolutionary about discovering that your dignity is far more magnetic than any performance of compliance. It can feel unfamiliar at first, like standing barefoot on new ground. You might notice the way your body tenses when you think about saying no, the way your heart flutters with fear, at the idea of disappointing someone who has grown accustomed to your easy yes. But there is a quiet liberation in learning that your worth is not measured by how much you can endure. Perhaps you've spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, that being chosen required you to soften every edge, to compromise your needs until you barely recognize the shape of your own longing. But here's the truth that no one ever taught you. Your boundaries are not barriers to intimacy. They are the invitation to something deeper, something more honest. When you draw a line between what you can give and what you cannot, you are not pushing love away. You are creating a space where real connection has a chance to grow. Louise Hay once wrote, "I do not fix others because I no longer see them as broken." Those words carry a kind of tender finality, a recognition that you are not here to heal the emptiness inside another person by abandoning yourself. You are not responsible for filling the hollow places in someone who has never learned how to meet you in your fullness. When you finally stop trying to rescue the ones who cannot love you in return, you reclaim the energy you have been scattering like confetti at the feet of those who never knew what to do with your devotion. And maybe this is where your real power begins, not in how much you can tolerate, but in how clearly you can see your own value. When you say no from a place of self-respect, it becomes a kind of quiet declaration. I will no longer shrink to fit the spaces that were never meant for me. I will no longer confuse being chosen with being cherished. It may surprise you to notice how your energy shifts when you start living this way. The need to be needed begins to dissolve. The ache for approval softens, and in its place grows something steady and luminous. The understanding that you are allowed to belong to yourself first. There is no arrogance in this, only a gentle return to your own center. A homecoming to the woman you were before you believed you had to earn your place in someone else's heart. There is an old story that so many women carry in their bones, a story that whispers that love is measured by how much pain you can endure without complaint. You may have felt this yourself, in the way you stayed silent when his words cut you, in the way you convinced yourself that if you were patient enough, forgiving enough, you would finally recognize your worth. It is a quiet kind of martyrdom, the belief that tolerating disrespect is proof of your devotion, that your suffering will one day be rewarded with the love you have always hoped to receive. But what if this story was never yours to carry? What if you inherited it from generations of women who were taught that their value lay in their ability to sacrifice everything, even their own peace, for the chance to be loved? And what if that story has kept you in relationships that starve you, relationships that demand you abandon yourself in the name of loyalty? There is a tender courage required to see this pattern for what it is. Not love, but fear in disguise. The fear of being alone. The fear of not being chosen. The fear of what it might mean if you stopped proving your worth and simply existed as you are. And yet, the moment you name this fear, something in you begins to soften. You start to realize that you were never meant to be the sacrificial lamb for someone else's unresolved trauma. Your willingness to stay, to absorb the hurt, to offer endless understanding, does not make you more lovable. It only makes you more exhausted. Imagine just for a moment what it would feel like to lay down this burden, to step out of the role of the savior, the healer, the woman who believes her love will be enough to transform another's emptiness. There is a profound relief in acknowledging that you are not here to carry what is not yours, that you are allowed to choose yourself, even if it means letting go of the hope that he will finally become the man you wished he could be. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to say goodbye to the version of yourself that believed endurance was the highest expression of love, to honor the part of you that stayed too long because she didn't know she deserved more. And in this act of farewell, something sacred is reclaimed, a quiet dignity, a deep remembering that love is never meant to cost you your spirit. Perhaps there is an old letter inside you, one you've been carrying silently, a letter to the part of you that thought she had to save everyone to be worthy. And maybe it is time to let her rest, to release her with gratitude for how hard she tried, because you are not here to mend what someone else broke. You are here to heal yourself, to come home to your own heart, to trust that real love will never ask you to sacrifice your soul to prove you deserve it. There is something quietly powerful about a woman who does not feel compelled to explain herself, a woman who knows that her silence is not an absence but a boundary. You might have noticed how different it feels when you no longer rush to justify your decisions, when you no longer soften your truth to make someone else more comfortable. There is a mystery in that restraint, a kind of magnetic self-possession that draws in those who recognize its worth and repels those who only valued your willingness to bend. Perhaps you have spent much of your life trying to be understood. You have explained your heart over and over, hoping that if you were just transparent enough, patient enough, he would finally see you. But what if being fully seen does not require you to narrate your every feeling? What if your presence, held with quiet certainty, is more compelling than any story you could tell? There is a maturity that grows in the spaces where you no longer feel the need to prove your goodness. You stop offering endless explanations for why you are hurt, why you are walking away, why you are no longer available to be the one who always forgives. You begin to understand that some people will never hear you no matter how gently or thoroughly you speak, and it is not your responsibility to make them understand. It is only your responsibility to remain faithful to the truth of your own heart. When you embody this kind of feminine mystery, something remarkable happens. You stop living in reaction to another's inconsistency. You stop measuring your worth by how much someone desires you, or how often they reach out. Instead, you become a woman whose self-respect is a quiet force, steady, unshakable, and free from the need to be constantly validated. I have always loved the image of the woman who smiles as she closes a door behind her, not with bitterness but with gratitude. Gratitude for what she learned, for how she grew, for the clarity she finally claimed. There is nothing more magnetic than a woman who can walk away with her head held high, knowing that her worth was never negotiable. And maybe this is what he cannot resist, not your explanations or your sacrifices, but the way you have returned to yourself without apology, the way you have chosen to be loyal to your own spirit, the way you have decided that your life is too precious to spend convincing someone to cherish what they were too distracted to notice. It can feel almost impossible to remember, in the ache of longing and disappointment, that your heart is a sacred place. When you have spent so many years giving and proving, sacrificing and hoping, you can forget that it was never your job to convince someone of your worth. It was only ever your responsibility to honor it yourself. Perhaps no one taught you how to protect this sacred space. Maybe you learned to equate love with endurance, to believe that if you just held on a little longer, he would finally rise to meet you. But the truth is that a heart that respects itself does not beg to be seen. It does not twist itself into something smaller to make someone else feel bigger. A heart that knows its own value does not stay where it is only tolerated. Louise Hay's words echo with such clarity here. I deserve to be respected simply because I exist. Not because you are perfect or endlessly accommodating. Not because you never ask for too much. Simply because you are here, breathing, loving, offering your presence. That alone makes you worthy of respect. Imagine what it would feel like to come home to this truth. To remember that your love is a gift, not a currency to be traded for scraps of affection. To feel in your bones that your needs are not burdens but guides, signposts pointing you back to what feels nourishing, honest, alive. There is something profoundly healing in reclaiming the sacred space of your own heart. You begin to see that the boundaries you set are not walls to keep love out, but gates that ensure only those who can meet you in mutual reverence are allowed to enter. You stop apologizing for wanting what you want. You stop shrinking to fit someone else's limited capacity. You begin to trust that the love you desire is real and possible, and that you will never have to abandon yourself to receive it. Maybe you can imagine yourself in this moment, standing before a mirror, not to criticize or evaluate, but to witness the quiet power in your own eyes, to recognize the strength it has taken to survive everything you thought would break you, to honor the woman who is still here, still willing to believe in the possibility of something more honest. And perhaps, in this small ritual of returning to yourself, you will feel it, a kind of quiet knowing that you are already whole, already enough, already worthy of every good thing your heart has ever longed for. As you breathe into this moment, perhaps you can feel the quiet relief that comes when you finally see the pattern for what it is, the way some men are drawn to women who don't orbit around their moods, who don't make their entire lives a shrine to someone else's uncertainty. It is not because these women are colder or harder or somehow less loving. It is because their energy does not bend itself into desperation. They are simply willing to remain centered in their own worth, no matter who comes or goes. This is the paradox so many of us were never taught to understand, that the very behavior you believed would make you indispensable, overgiving, over-explaining, overcompensating, was the thing that kept you invisible. Because love that must be begged for will never feel like belonging. Love that demands you perform will never feel like peace. And all the while, the real hunger was never for his validation. It was for the deeper knowing that you were worthy of love without needing to earn it. Every time you stayed too long, every time you silenced your intuition in the name of loyalty, every time you tolerated less than you deserved, you were trying to soothe the old wound that whispered you were not enough. But what if you could lay that story down, here, in this moment? What if you could believe Louise Hay when she said, "You have the power to change your patterns when you decide to love yourself"? Maybe you can feel the possibility in that. The quiet power that comes when you stop making your worth conditional on anyone's ability to see it. When you trust that the love you are willing to give to yourself sets the standard for every relationship you will ever have. And perhaps the most liberating truth is this: you do not need to play small to keep someone close. Marianne Williamson once wrote, "Your playing small does not serve the world, and it does not serve your heart either. Your light is not too much. Your needs are not too big. Your longing is not an inconvenience. They are evidence that your spirit remembers what it feels like to be met, cherished, chosen without conditions. So maybe this is the beginning of something gentler. A season where you choose to stand like a lighthouse, steady, bright, unshakable, trusting that those meant for you will find their way without you having to dim your radiance to guide them. And as you sit here now, I invite you to consider this. Your worth is an unshakable lighthouse. Whether he chooses to approach it or drift away is not your responsibility. It never was. If these words have stirred something in you, know that you are not alone in this journey. You are part of a community of women reclaiming their power, one honest choice at a time. And if you feel ready to keep exploring these truths, you can join me by subscribing to this channel, so you never miss the conversations that remind you of who you are. You are welcome to continue your journey by clicking the video that has just appeared on your screen. There, you will find more reflections to guide you back to your own heart, because this is not the end. It is simply the beginning of coming home to yourself,